Hi, welcome back to I Can't Stop Talking About SCP. Last week, I talked about the groups in SCP I know of. I don't know if that was a terrible idea, but I've learned a lot more. Rather than boring you with another list of all the groups, I want to finish this. So I'm going to tell you about my favorite SCPs I've read, listened to, and obsessed about for the last few months. Next week on my podcast, Not So Aloney, and the week after in a video form, I'm going to write an SCP series. But after that, I'm going cold turkey. I'm sure I'll relapse, and I'll come back and do this again eventually, but I'm going to try to stop talking about SCP, even though I love it. So here's my favorite SCPs. I put them all in number order. To start it off, SCP-001, A Good Boy. This SCP is about if the Foundation created an AI to solve all their problems. It's really fascinating. To really simplify it so I can get through this list of so many of these, they create an AI and they ask it to find out how to contain SCPs better. The AI starts containing them and giving them really weird instructions on how to contain them, doing really weird stuff, and it ends up working even though it's ridiculous and unrelated. It continues to do this until eventually they become entirely dependent on this AI to contain things. Then it starts asking for incredibly weird shit, like it wants them to kill cats and stuff. And eventually, they try to stop it, but it starts kidnapping and mind-controlling different members of the council, and it gets really insane. And in the end, it succeeds. So if you really want to learn more about that, because I don't want to completely spoil everything, go check it out. SCP-001, A Good Boy. There's a million of 001s, but that one is one of the weird ones. SCP-106, the Old Man. I love the Old Man. He might be one of my favorite monsters. But what I love the most about him is a specific tale that starts in World War II. The Old Man is a creepy monster that secretes goo, and he goes around teleporting, sending people to a pocket dimension and eating them. And the only way they've figured out how to stop him is to put a D-Class in a little box that breaks all of their bones so that he'll show up and they can capture him. He's creepy. He's kind of rude to women at times, but he's a really interesting monster and really terrifying. And there's a tale that explains his origin, and I really like it. SCP-507. Now, this may be my favorite character in all of SCP. He's the reluctant dimension hopper. He's basically just a nerd who gets trapped in this infinite loop of traveling and coming back and traveling and coming back. Somehow, he has the ability to disappear and reappear in another reality for a certain amount of time. So, throughout his life, every 2 weeks, he'll disappear, reappear in another world, and have to survive it until the time runs out, however long that is, and he reappears back in his homeworld. The fun of him is how he slowly develops and the stories in which he appears. He's one of my favorite Easter eggs because he'll appear in multiple stories as just a dude that shows up and then he leaves. And it's really interesting to see all the ways the original story has him connect to other versions of himself, to the different SCP people. And he's a really interesting and fun character that just sort of pops in and out of places. I highly recommend it if you want to find a character you really like. SCP-1000. Maybe the weirdest one when I was first listening, and I was like, oh, that's good. Basically, it's Bigfoot, but it's way more complicated than you could ever think, and I love it. It starts with a little story about the traditional Bigfoot, and you think, well, this is terrible, it's just Bigfoot. But then, it has the most insane twist of all time. And I don't want to spoil it, but I'll just say, there's more than one, and they're completely different than you'd expect. SCP-10048, Builder-Bear. I really love the Child's Play movies, and to think that there's an SCP inspired by it is amazing. To simplify this, there's a little bear, and it can talk. It's a living bear, it's nice, it's cuddly, it's fun. But when it's unsupervised, it does some pretty fucked up shit. It starts wanting friends. So it will take people and mutilate them in a very horrifying way that is very interesting to listen to. And it will then turn them into bears, the remains of them, into a tiny little bear made out of whatever it can find. It'll do it out of people, it'll do it out of objects, it'll do it out of anything. And the original tale behind it is horrifying. And if you want something that will not scar you, but make you think and sort of be horrific, it's a good one. SCP-1461, The House of the Worm. This one's fucking crazy, and a lot of people think different things about it. Some people think it's an origin story for a big god in the universe. Other people think it's just a cool one-off. I just like it. Basically, it's about greed and industrialization and wealthy lunatics. To simplify it without spoiling it, there is a man who is rich, and he's building a company. He's making stuff, and World War II comes, and he's pretty nuts at that point. He's slowly going insane from World War I when he fought, and he's trying to defeat this giant creature that he calls the Worm, this industrialized monster that's coming to destroy everything. So he slowly builds up, using a bunch of poor people and desperate people, a construction thing. He starts building a horrifying machine that will eventually destroy him and everyone around him. And it has a lot to do with cults. It has a lot of fucked up things to do with sacrifice and blood and guts and all those fun SCP things. So I highly recommend it because the ending is pretty fucking good. SCP-1678, On London. On London isn't particularly all that amazing. I just really like it. Basically, there's a secret city beneath London, and it's just fascinating to hear how it works. Sometimes it's just fun to hear someone explain a place. So if you want sort of a Fallout-y vibe, On London is really good. I feel like that could fit specifically in Fallout. SCP-1762, Where the Dragons Went. This one and another one coming up are probably my all-time favorites. It's all about imagination and belief and how we've lost it. And to really explain it without giving anything away, there's a box and it says on it, "Here there be dragons." And tiny little paper dragons fly out of it, and the Foundation has no idea what to do with it. And slowly it gets worse and worse until something bad happens. And it's all about the power of belief and how we may have lost it. SCP-3001, Red Reality. This one speaks to me on a personal level. It's all about being alone and isolated and how that would work, how your mind would act when there's no one and nothing. It's got Castaway vibes, but only instead of an island, it's another reality, a pocket dimension that you can never escape, a place between worlds. And it kind of ends open, but not really. And I really love that story. It's super tragic. SCP-3008, A Normal Ikea. This one's pretty famous. This might have been the first SCP I ever heard about. But basically, there was an Ikea that appeared, and when you go inside of it, you can never get out, and it's infinite. It's an entire universe inside this Ikea. It's stocked with crazy mannequins that are alive, that are like the security guards of the place. And it's really fascinating to listen to all the stories of the people in there. We're back to the one I said before to look out for. SCP-3844, To Slay a Dragon. So in the last one, it was a box of little dragons, and it was all about belief. This one is about an actual dragon. It starts in early 1900s when a researcher finds this dragon and is basically talking to him and communicating with him to get him to not fly around too much. The dragon thinks that they are knights and they're coming to basically kill him. And the SCP guys basically say, "No, we're scientists. We're here to just study you and make sure nobody sees you." The dragon knows it's bullshit, but there's nothing he can really do about it because they got a lot more weapons than he does. And he's all alone. So he agrees to stay in his cave and he can fly around a little bit, but things are, on lockdown. Throughout the story, we follow the researcher as he's getting older and older and time is going forward and forward. We go through World War II, we go through more technological advancements, and eventually we come to the modern day where slowly his relationship with this dragon changes and the way we describe the dragon changes. And it's all about how we slowly lose belief, and it has a very, very sad ending. But there's a little bit of hope right in the last few lines. And I really love the ones about imagination. Just a few left. I know this is probably boring. SCP-4051, Your Friendly Neighborhood Keter. This one is amazing. You ever thought, what if Spider-Man was in SCP? That's what this is. What if a kid got superpowers and suddenly the SCP Foundation showed up? It's really sad, but also really interesting. And I say you should just read it. It's about a kid with superpowers, and he is picked up by the SCP Foundation, and things happen. A lot of things. It could have been a lot darker, but I actually really like it. They may be one of my favorite characters. On the exact opposite of the spectrum, SCP-4666 is the Yule Man. If you want a Christmassy story, and you want maybe the most horrific story I have ever read from SCP, the Yule Man is basically Santa Claus, but more horrifying than you could possibly imagine. I don't think this could be made into a movie or a story because it is so fucking horrible. Not in like it's a bad story, but in a, oh my god, that harmed me to read, but I love it. Trying not to give anything away, just imagine if Santa was emaciated and he tortured and mutilated naughty children and their families, and then he kidnapped them and the rest is better to read in the story. But he does make toys for the good ones, except they're made out of human remains. It's a pretty weird one. And then we'll talk about this last one just because I think it's really interesting. There's a couple of groups that are in a couple of different SCPs, and I just like them, and I didn't include them before. SCP-4833 is the origin of Syncope Labs. It's all about looking back at this one high school class in 1976, and how everyone from that class is being affected by various items, and this horrible thing happened there, and they're not sure what it is. And it's all about the investigation and discovering these people called Syncope Labs, and how they want to stop this thing by using the harmony. And it's really interesting and mind-warping. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it already in the last one, but I fucking love the Syncope Labs stories because they're not even really explained yet. I've been recording this for like 20 minutes, and I was going to go through all the various weird concepts like amnestics, anti-amnestics, memetics, anti-memetics, pataphysics, but those concepts are weird and they take too long to explain. So that's the last I'm going to talk about SCP for a while. Like I said, I'm going to do a podcast about it. There's a lot of different ways to interpret it, and I want to see what I come up with. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, do all those things that you do. Comment, tell me how stupid I am and how this video is a waste of time. Anyway, thanks for listening. Bye.